Hello my friends, welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George Isted, the Solent Boat Butler, and it says it up there on my SJ320. This is my own personal boat, although I do refit and repair boats for a living, but we're covering the rebirth, the reimagining of this SJ320, which is hull number 3 from 1995. I bought her in a very, very sorry state, and over the last few videos I have been carrying out a refit on her to get her race ready for 2025. And there is one very important job that I have got to do before I get her in the water, and the clue is down there. It's a Saildrive boat, and there is a Saildrive Diaphragm that I really must replace. Here is that Saildrive leg that I was talking about. So the engine in this boat is a Volvo 2020, which is a cracking little engine made by Perkins, marinised by Volvo Penta, and I'm very happy to have that in the boat. I've got essentially the same engine in my Westerly Sealord that I've owned for a few years and cruised far and wide. It's mated to a, I'm going to get this wrong, a 120S Saildrive, and unfortunately one of the things you have to do with Saildrives, there are lots of pros and cons of having shaft drive versus Saildrive, which I'm not going to go into, but one of the cons of having a Saildrive system is you have a gator up inside which keeps the seawater on the right side of the hull, and those have a finite life. The manufacturers say they should be replaced every 7 years. Now, I do know that they last an awful lot longer than that in practice, but the manufacturer's recommendation is 7 years, and I do not know how old the one is in this boat. I don't think it's original. I really hope it's not original because, you know, 95 boat. The previous owner's son thought it had been changed but couldn't remember when, how or who did it. So that has to be changed. Now, this refit has been ongoing for a number of months. I've done quite a lot. If you want to look back at the old videos, you will see the mast has been off. It's had all new rigging, lights, wiring, what have you, and then the rig's been put back on. I have stripped the bottom back to gel coat and then left it to dry during the summer months of last year. It's now been recoated with an epoxy barrier coat and anti-fouled. I've done an electronics upgrade. I've had the rudder off. I sorted out the bearings, drain the rudder, fix the rudder, put that back on. The keel was really rusty. That's been stripped. That's all been dealt with. It's been filled and fed, so it is perfect like the rest of the bottom of this boat. And there's been lots of other jobs as well. But one of the key things is to get this boat in the water as soon as possible so I can go and have to play with it and look at the sails that I've got with the boat and work out what, if any, sails I may need. Now, I definitely will need new sails at some point, but they are out of budget, and this is very much a budget boat build, and why I am doing it all myself. I mean, it helps that I am a boat builder, of course. Right, let me take you upstairs and we'll have a look at the engine. We are now inside the boat, and I've just removed the engine box from the engine way. This is actually a surprisingly large interior. For a 31.5-foot boat, we have twin aft cabins there. We have the nav station, which you may have seen in previous videos. There is a compact galley with a proper cooker with an oven, which I'm a big fan of, and a berth there with an engine box on top of it. I'm sorry about the mess. Separate heads and shower there, and through that little corridor there is a double V-berth forward cabin. So for a, well, nearly 32-foot boat, there is a ton of space in here. And what I also really like are these windows, which give you fantastic visibility. They remind me a little bit of the front end of a spaceship from Battlestar Galactica, I think it was. One of the baddie spaceships had those kind of long slit windows, and I really like it, but that's probably showing my age a little bit. Anyway, on to the engine. As I said earlier in the video, this is a Volvo Penta 2020, which isn't a model that's still available. They've upgraded it since then. It's a little bit rusty in places, but generally speaking, it's in pretty good nick considering it's the original engine from 1995. I ran it for quite a while when I looked at the boat originally before buying it, got it up to temperature, checked it was all good, and it ran really well. It took a while to start because it hadn't been used for many years, I believe, but I checked all the vitals, checked it would run. It ran absolutely fine, a bit of power there, and so I think essentially it's a good engine. It needs a little bit of fettling, it needs a blimming good service, I think, but that isn't the subject of this video. We need to sort out the Saildrive at the back. So clamped to the back of this engine is a gearbox, and attached to the bottom of that gearbox is the leg, and clamped between the gearbox and the leg is the Saildrive Diaphragm, which is in turn bolted down with a big metal ring to the hull of the boat. Now, what I need to do is unbolt everything on the engine that allows me to pull it forward. So I've got to separate the engine from the gearbox. And so in theory, all the things that are going to stop me from pulling it forward and out of the gearbox, I need to remove. So that's going to be the exhaust hose at the back here, control cables here, any random cables, some hoses and what have you. So I'm going to get busy doing that in a minute. Once the engine is forward, I'm going to have to support it. So this engine is currently mounted to the boat effectively by two front feet that are just out of shot down here, and then there is a single mounting on the back of the gearbox, and between those three things, that's what holds the engine and gearbox into the boat. As soon as I unmount this from the gearbox, the back end of the engine is going to want to fall down. So I'm going to get some bits of wood. I'm going to see what I can find in the boatyard to shove under the back of the engine, so when I pull it forward I can just drop it down. It's not a particularly heavy engine, so I'm hoping that I can manhandle this and wiggle this out myself. The tricky bit is because the gearbox is also only going to have one mounting point, I'm going to have to support the gearbox, and I'll come on to that in a little while so that the two things can be separated without damaging anything. In preparation for this video, I have bought a full service kit for the engine, so standard Volvo service kit. It basically has all the standard service items, so filters, doodad for the water pump, the impeller, so that is all in here, but we're not going to get to that in this video. I'm going to do that afterwards. But I have also got a belt. I have also got an anode for the leg, because the anode that is there is basically gone. Caught it just in time. But I have in here another box of goodies, which is the diaphragm service kit, which should hold everything that I need. Now, this service kit covers multiple different Saildrive legs, I believe. It's stamped on the outside here that it does a number of different Saildrives, but I did tell them it's a 120 and they said, oh, we just need this one. And there's a whole bunch of O-rings, gaskets. There are some instructions. I have been told the instructions are very, very good. So I'm going to have a look at them in a minute and try not to be sick, because I am a man and reading instructions does not come naturally. There is a new rubbery gaiter thing which glues on the underside of the boat, and there is the Saildrive gaiter, and on this should be stamped a date so that anyone looking at it in the future will be able to say, oh, this was made in whenever it was made. So this has actually got 2023 stamped on it, which is slightly annoying because it is January 2025, but at the end of the day, it hasn't been used, it's been in a box. So I'll make a note in the ship's logbook of when this job was done, because I've been keeping a record of all the works that have been done. And then we know we've got 7 years from this being installed, which will keep the insurance company happy that I am adequately maintaining my vessel. Well, I've had a quick scan of the instructions just to remind myself what I'm doing. I imagine this has been covered before on the YouTube, so there may be better videos than mine, but that doesn't mean you should start looking at those until after you've finished watching this one, of course. Instructions are always a good thing when you're doing a job that you haven't done before. I've got to be honest, I haven't actually replaced one of these before. I'm used to dealing with shaft drive boats. I've never replaced the diaphragm on a Saildrive before. I've spoken to a Volvo engineer and he said, don't worry about it, George, it's a nuts and bolts job. The reason that we charge quite a lot for doing this job normally is because access is always very difficult. Quite often it needs two people, and it's just a fiddly job. Not technically difficult, just fiddly because of access. And I have got a small amount of access at the back here to get the gearbox up and out of the boat, at which point I'll take it off to the workshop and do all the necessary around there on the bench. But the first thing I need to do is to go downstairs. I need to drain the oil out of the leg and also take the propeller off, just because it doesn't need to be there. It's going to be in the way and it's just going to be easier to manhandle the leg up and out of the boat doing it without a prop attached. So I'm going to take this off because it's clean and find some gloves and get to work. Well folks, here we are under the boat, so we need to remove this to start with. The way to remove these props, this is a Flexifold prop. Centrifugal force in use makes the blades spin out like that, and when you're sailing it does that. So really common. To remove the prop we need to remove the blades. There are a pair of pins, one through each blade here, and they are held in place with a little grub screw. So I need to take those two grub screws out, and then I can knock the pins out, and then I can take the blades off, and then I can get to the nut which is holding the central part of the prop off. Then it should just slide off. It's a splined shaft that it goes onto. Next job after that is to remove the oil. There is a bung right here, so it just has a slot in it, so big slotted screwdriver needed in there. Crack it off, let the oil come out, and depending on what comes out will determine what happens after that, because if we get nice clean oil out of it, then I know the seals are all good and we'll just pop new oil in when it all goes back together. If what comes out is milky, horrible, disgusting looking oil that's obviously had water in it, then might have to do something about the seals that are stopping the water from entering into the leg down here. So that will be a case of suck it and see. So first job, let's get this off. Well, moment of truth. A very nice man who was passing, who's a friend of mine, has a special tool. I was struggling to get my largest screwdriver in there and turn it. I don't want to damage the bung here, so I have this, which a machinist friend of mine has made. It's very nice. And it's because you had trouble undoing yours, didn't you?
Yep.
Yeah. Right, let's see how this goes. I might need, oh, perhaps if I have the ratchet going the right way. Push. Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Right, let us see the colour of the oil. The moment of truth. I really ought to have gloves on for this. Please be oil coloured. I can hear gurgling. Oh, it's watercoloured. Right.
Water.
Oh, here comes some oil. I haven't taken the dipstick out, so I'm going to pop this back in. Put the dipstick in. Oh, if you want. Yeah, it's all accessible. Thankfully, I have a friend who just happened to be passing who didn't realise he was coming to be my assistant. Oh, there we go. I mean, actually, the oil's quite clean. Right, well, I'm now doing what I should have done to start with, which is the bucket trick. You hang your little paint kettle or bucket on the shaft, and the oil just drains and it frees up your hands. The oil that's come out is relatively clean, apart from it obviously has had some water in it. So there's pure water right in the bottom, and the oil is slightly emulsified, where obviously it's spinning with a bit of water in there. There's an O-ring in the bottom of here which seals this, which should be replaced every time you do this job, I was told by the Volvo dealer, and there's a chance that wasn't done. People tend to try and save a few pounds. So what I think I'm actually going to do is risk it. I'm going to replace the O-ring there when I put it all back together, and hope that is the problem, but I will drain it all down next time the boat is out, after I've used the boat a bit. If there is still some water in the oil that's managed to get back into the leg, then I know I've got to do all the bearing and shaft seals in here. But I'm trying to do, to be honest, as little work as possible to get the boat back in the water and usable, just in the interest of time. So that, I think, is the plan. But you know what they say about plans, they do tend to change. They're written in sand. Right, I'm going to go and dump some of this oil in the oil recycler and then start unbolting things up there. Well folks, wrenching or spannering, as I like to call it because I'm not an American, has been done. And that isn't a diss against Americans, I just enjoy the differences in our language immensely. I have just backed off the 4 bolts that hold the front feet. Most things that need to be removed, I think, have been removed. The things that haven't been removed have got enough slack in the hoses or cables that it can come forward. According to the instructions, the engine needs to move 300 mil, so a bit over an inch, to disengage from the gearbox as a minimum. I think I can get it forward about 2 inches without it falling off the engine beds. But the first test is to see whether I can physically lift it up. At the front at least, it's still supported at the back on that central engine mount at the back. So let's see how strong I am. And that is moving. There we go. So I can get that up and wiggle it around a little bit. So I should, hopefully, once I've undone the gearbox to engine mounts, in theory I can slide it all forward. Now, to stop the leg and the gearbox dropping down, what I've done outside is I've run a rope from the forward starboard and port cradle props around the leg, and I've tensioned them up. So I've got a piece of rope that's pulling the leg forward, which will resist, hopefully, the leg swinging down as I try and pull the engine forward. I'm going to probably have to play with the tension on that rope a little bit to try and adequately support it, but in theory that should work. If it doesn't, I'm going to have to try and grab another pair of hands. I'm going to go and make a coffee, have a think, and then have a go unbolting everything, sliding this forward, see what happens. As always with the old boat stuff, there's a few extra jobs that crop up along the way, but it's kind of better to find them now than find them at sea. This is the water feed to the calorifier, the hot water tank that is on the boat, and I undid the hose clamp, pulled on the hose, and basically the hose came apart in 2 pieces. So this was on its way out, so I'm either going to have to replace this hose in its entirety or cut a section out because it isn't quite long enough, I think, without causing a rub on there. So yes, extra jobs are already cropping up, but that's old boats for you. It's kind of par for the course. Well folks, progress report. It's all going well. There has been a bit of a struggle, but the engine is now separated from the gearbox. So you need to support the engine somehow. They suggest blocks of wood underneath, which absolutely makes sense if you can get to the underneath. I've got very limited access to get things in there. Ideally, you'd put wooden blocks in there and then maybe like a stainless steel plate or something like that, and the engine would skid on the stainless plate. But again, don't have that, so I have improvised. And I have a piece of rope around the engine here, which is going up to the boom, and the boom has been pulled up tight on a couple of Dyneema halyards. So I've taken the weight of the back of the engine with that, and with a friend who just happened to be passing at exactly the right time, or the wrong time, depending on your point of view. And so with the help of Dave down below and myself wiggling up above, we've both been wiggling and jiggling, and we've managed to separate the engine and the gearbox, and the engine has been pulled forward about 2 inches, I would say. So what I'm now going to do is reposition those blocks of wood under the back of the engine, and they're actually, I think the engine's actually partially sitting on them by the feel of it, and lower this halyard down so the engine now just drops down and sits hopefully on some blocks of wood and hopefully won't move too far. So I'm going to start unmounting all the bolts that hold the gearbox in place, and then I may or may not require some assistance from below to get the gearbox and leg up, twisted and out into the aft cabin. I'm assuming this has been done before, and I'm assuming it is possible to get it out through the kind of the gap that is there, but I strongly suspect I'm going to need some help, someone from below just to help guide it up. But a friend of mine has offered to come and help this afternoon potentially, so I'm going to get that unbolted, give him a ring and see what we can do. As you just saw, with the help of a very able assistant, thank you Sean, I managed to get this out. It just about fits with a bit of wiggling and a bit of persuasion, and so I've just got to get this down the ladder off to the workshop and we can start doing some spannering on this to replace this rubber seal. Well folks, I've got this leg and gearbox on the bench. I have a fresh mug of tea, which is essential equipment, a box of goodies and some instructions, but I do also have limited time today because I need to go and get daughter fairly soon. But there's a few things of note that you are probably wondering about, and I'm also going to mention. So the first thing is the age of this old diaphragm. They are supposed to be replaced every 7 years, according to the manufacturer. It's well known that they do last an awful lot longer than that, as long as they're not mistreated or maltreated. This one has a date on it. It's from 2007. So in theory, it should have been replaced in 2014. It's now 2025. So it's only 11 years past its due date. I'm saying 11, you know, obviously I'm taking the piss. It should have been done long before now. However, is there any signs of damage? None. None whatsoever. It looks absolutely perfect. I mean, this is just dirt here that just flakes off. It isn't cracking in any places. There's no physical damage. It doesn't look discoloured. It has had a bit of oil that's been sat on it, I think, where it's been filled up, but that doesn't appear to have affected it. I guess it's made out of something which is fairly oil resistant. So do you need to replace them every 7 years? Well, the manufacturer says so. And so that is what we do, because if your boat sinks because the diaphragm splits, then you're in a whole world of pain with your insurance company. But anyway, I have the bits, we're going to do it. The next thing that's worth noting is this engine mount or gearbox mount at the back here. This needs replacing. It's complete junk. In fact, I bet if I pull hard enough, yeah, there we go. On one side, the rubber has detached from the metal part of the engine mount, and at the other side the rubber had torn, and I've just torn it a little bit more. Should have put gloves on. So I would not have known that that was broken had I had not pulled the engine out. So so that's another thing that I'll have to add to the shopping list. Round on the other side we have this thing here, which is the splined input shaft, which goes into the back of the engine. There is some wear on here. It was one of the things that I wanted to check. I've given this a clean. I've had a look at the wear. I've also sent it off to a trained Volvo engineer, and he's gone, yeah, that's not ideal. I've looked at different options for whether I can just replace that part. I can probably order it, but it requires a whole gear set to be ordered, which is going to be very, very expensive. The other option is there's a company that makes an adapter which goes on here, but that is not compatible with my 2020 engine. It's only compatible with the old 2002, 2003 series engines, so I can't do that. So the third option is I go and get myself a second-hand good gearbox, and that is an option I'm looking at as an alternative to this one in the longer term. But because I know this works, and I think the gearbox is a good gearbox, and this is wear that has happened over a number of years, nearly 30 years this boat is of age, so I'm just going to go with this has probably got a few years life left back in it. So because I don't know how good the engine is, I mean, it starts and it stops and it runs and appears to be fine, but I haven't really run it or tested it for any length of time. I don't want to spend a whole load of money replacing this. So I'm going to put this back in as it is, make sure this is well greased, and with a new diaphragm, I think it will be good for, who knows, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It's impossible to say. I am quite mechanically sympathetic. I don't like going from full ahead to full astern, which puts a lot of load on these splines. So, you know, generally I do always tell my clients, and I do it myself, is always make sure you put it in gear at tick over speed and then put revs on. And then if you're having to go into reverse, let the engine slow down. Don't just slam it in reverse, because that just puts a load of shock loads in every part of the system. So just try and be mechanically sympathetic. So that's the plan. Change that, leave that for now. I've got a friend who is a Volvo engineer who's going to keep an eye out for a replacement box off a engine that has died, but with a good box and good leg, so that I have a spare should I want one. But for now, this is going back in. So I'm going to pull the destructions out, but essentially what I think I need to do is take this wire out. So some of these fixings have holes through and they're wired so that they can't vibrate loose. So take the wire off, start separating this all apart, and take it from there. Well, you are set up very high and you can see all this is now apart, and it actually came apart really, really easily. No corrosion on any of the fixings or whatever, so really couldn't be easier. It took 5 minutes. So there is a O-ring there which seals the water to oil ways, which locates in there. We've obviously got the Saildrive diaphragm itself, which kind of clips into here and is clamped under there. It looks like, I'm not sure if there's a tiny bit of corrosion there, possibly, where the water was just trying to get through a little bit. I can't see any evidence of it on here, so I'm not entirely sure if that was just dirt that was on there. There's a gasket that goes between this and that, which had some red goo on it, probably some sort of sealant that was put on by whoever put the last one on. And that's that. It's pleasing to know that there's virtually no play in this gear set here. Hardly any backlash at all on that. Same with there. I mean, you can feel it a little bit here because when it goes into gear, things move around inside slightly to locate on the clutches, if it's a clutch cone like another gearbox I've had apart. But it all appears to be in pretty good nick, if I'm honest, apart from obviously these splines which I talked about earlier. So I'm going to give everything a really good clean, and then it's just going to be a case of putting it back together again with all the new bits, which I'm expecting to take no longer than it took to take it apart. To clean all this goo off, to clean all this sort of dirt and shellfish off, I'm going to get a like a Stanley knife blade or a snap-off blade, because it's completely flat and I can just use that as a scraper gently on all these surfaces, and it should get everything nice and clean. There's not too much point in cleaning the waterways. I can't really see a lot down there in terms of the waterways, so if it was full of shellfish then obviously I'd try to poke it all out, but surprisingly it's fairly clear in there. I was expecting it to be full of mussels or something, given the state of the bottom when the boat was lifted, because it had been afloat for so many years before I bought it. So I'm going to get cracking with cleaning, and then it'll be reassembly time. Well folks, it's now the next day. It's very, very cold outside, so I'm quite pleased to be in here with some heating on. Everything has been cleaned. I had to go and buy some very expensive, because I couldn't get it anywhere else at short notice, gasket sealing stuff which isn't based on silicone. It does expressly say do not use silicone liquid gasket when you're putting this stuff together. So this is a non-silicone gasket cement from Volvo. You can buy this online for about £17, I think I found it, but I couldn't get it today, so I spent considerably more than that at the Volvo Penta dealer. However, they did give me a bit of discount. I think they felt sorry for me. So I need to start putting this all back together. I'm just going to remove that delicate gasket for a minute, because I was just testing everything where it goes. So we have the new wibbly wobbly thing. There's a sticker on here, I might as well take off. No, it doesn't want to come off. Well, it's not going to affect it, so that just needs to go in here. This has all obviously been cleaned. I'm just going to run my finger around just to check it's all good. So that is going to go in there, and there is a new black O-ring on there, and it's just a case of lining this up. This is all going to be full of seawater, but it's just a case of lining this up so that those two holes there and that hole there go into the appropriate place. So let me just check. Yeah, that's all clean. Fore and aft, I'm going to say probably it's either going to be that way round or I've got 180 degrees out. No, it is that way round. There we go. So that does up. The O-ring in the middle should seal. The rubber on the outside should seal. I need to put 3 cap head bolts in there. They are the 3 shortest ones, which are here, but I'm going to put them in with a tiny little bit of grease on the threads because they came out nice and easily, because they had a nice bit of grease on the threads. Having checked the destructions again, there actually isn't a torque setting for these 3. There's torque settings for when you mount other parts of it back together, so we'll just do it to the German standard, which, as you probably know, is good and tight. These have had a little bit of grease on them, just on the threads, not on the end, because I don't want to hydraulic the screw into where it's going into. There. Next up, we have this glorious stuff, and we have a gasket. So this fella needs to go on here, like so. I think it has a little brush inside. It does. Don't forget, if you like this sort of content, if you're learning or just enjoying, then do remember to give me a thumbs up down below. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Now, if you want to be super awesome, there is a link down in the description where you can buy me a beer. But if you don't wish to do that, that's no problem. All those beer tokens do help keep the lights on here at Refit and Sail. They pay for new cameras and software and storage for data, because I have to store all these videos somewhere. And all these sort of things, they all cost money. So all those beer tokens occasionally get spent on beer, but quite often get spent on much more mundane things, unfortunately. Right, that has got a decent coat of goop all over it. So gasket can go on. Right, it's confession time now on this show. When I turned this upside down, there was a little bit of residual oil in the leg. Fortunately, oil, not water, and it dribbled down both of these back holes. And when I tried to put these long bolts in, they tightened up and they were trying to hydraulic in there. Fortunately, I realised in time, pulled it out, haven't done any damage that I can see. Threads still seem okay. Turned it up the right way, and I've had to wait a while for the oil that had gone in to come out, and I've tried to clean it out as best I can. Managed to get the fixing in on that side. I'm just about to put the last one in now with a little bit of grease on it, and it's doing up okay. So there's a lesson learnt there. Either you need to make sure your leg is completely 100% free of oil, or be a bit more careful, or do it the other way around with the leg down and the gearbox up. I don't know. Either way, you don't want to be hydraulicking your or hydro-locking your fixings into the leg. Now the instructions do give a bit of information about how you want to do these nuts up, just like doing up the head bolts. If you've replaced a head gasket and putting the cylinder head back on an engine, you need to do these bolts up in the right order as well. Basically it's 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of across the middle, and then the outer ones, and then these two finally to tweak them all up, so you do it all in the right order and you're not stressing anything, because this is a casting and you don't want to wank it up really tight on one side and then crack it because you haven't done it up on the other side. So the whole thing needs to be kind of pulled in square to the two mating faces. Again, there doesn't appear to be a torque setting for these fixings that I can find in the instructions, so again I'm just going to do them up reasonably tight but not over tight by hand, and then it's basically done. It's ready to go back into the boat, which is great news. This will all get anti-fouled once it's in, but yeah, I don't think there's anything more to do. Oh yes, there is. I forgot to say, so the inner bolts, or these cap head screws, have a small hole in them, and that is so that you can run a piece of wire between them. You may remember earlier in the video I cut off a piece of wire, so I've got to reinstate that piece of very expensive Volvo monoseizing wire so that these can't rattle undone in use. So I shall do that shortly once I've just given them all a bit more of a tweak. Welcome back to the boat, where I have a leg and a gearbox to get back into the hole. I've just spent kind of half an hour or so cleaning up the surface that this diaphragm needs to seal down on, because there was lots of old paint and just rubbish in there. So I got a little scraper and scraped all the surface off and cleaned it all out, and then I've hoovered all in there so it's all nice and clean. And at the moment I'm on my own, so I'm not sure even if it's going to be possible for me to get this in on my own, but I'm going to give it a try. My plan, because I'm on my own, I've been thinking about how to do this, is I've put the repainted ring back in there, which is the ring that goes over the top of the diaphragm here, which is obviously just out of shot. There we go, you can just see it there. I've put the ring in there. I'm going to try and maneuver the leg in through the hole and then drop this down into the hole, and I'm kind of hoping it will sit there on the ring and not go through. I mean, it can't physically fit through the lower hole, so that isn't a problem. And then I'm going to try and support it from underneath with some blocks of wood and bits and pieces. This may or may not go well. In theory, this will stop it from falling too far, so we shall see. This is the new engine mount, or gearbox mount, which I've loosely bolted on. It's just finger tight at the moment, so everything can kind of move. This may or may not involve swearing, and I apologise if it does. Cue the music, maybe, we'll see. And of course I put grease on the input shaft and have immediately put my hand on the grease. So I've also put grease on the plate on the back of the engine, because that will hopefully minimise the wear. So I'm going to wipe the grease off this just for a minute. There's probably enough on there. I put a fair amount in the hole that the splines go into. Oh, nothing quite like wiping your nose on a slightly greasy tissue. Right. Oh. Well, the bottom of the leg is through the bottom of the boat. I'm sorry you can't see this, but there's just no room. Oh man. Oh. I just remembered, after getting this out, I pushed the engine back a bit, and that might be why I'm struggling for space. Okay, let's just wedge that there. I'm just going to wiggle the engine forward a couple of inches. Right, attempt number 2. Now I have a tiny bit more space. It should go in. After all, it came out. Oh man. Okay, it's in. There we go. As you can see, it is in. It's sitting on its rubber mount, and it's sitting on the gearbox mount, which is kind of back there. You can see why I can't really get a camera angle to film this going in, but I'm now going to see if I can wiggle this rubber up, or wiggle this through, so the rubber is underneath this painted silver ring, and then see if I can loosely get some bolts in. Well folks, with surprising ease and surprisingly little swearing, I managed to get all the fixings in for the ring down there. So what I did was, rather than using the rope trick that I tried with taking everything apart, I put some blocks of wood on the cradle and up under the leg, and I think that worked really well to support the weight of the gearbox and the leg whilst I got everything in. So all the fixings are in, they're all kind of loose. I'll see if I can show you how it all looks. Everything's all kind of loose in there, but hopefully you can see through that hole fixings, ring, diaphragm and what have you. So now that I've got all the fixings in, I'm actually going to take them all out again actually, because my friend, who is a Volvo engineer, a very good, well-trained, Volvo-trained engineer, told me when I put it all together, he gave me the Newton meter torque settings, which are actually in the instructions here, but he also said put a little bit of Loctite, blue Loctite, so not super strong stuff, on each of the fixings when they go in. Do them up, job's a good one, because I actually asked him whether it's advisable to put sealant, you know, just silicone or some other sealant on the diaphragm between any of the mating faces, and he said absolutely not. It is designed to go together dry and should seal. There's quite a big sealing area of rubber between the diaphragm and the metal ring, and also the rubber diaphragm and the hull, so it should all just go together and sandwich itself nicely together as long as you do everything up to the required torques. Well, in terms of the diaphragm, all the bolts are done up with Loctite, so that is all done, and I've wiggled the engine back so it's close to being engaged on the splines. So the splines on the input shaft of the gearbox have to go into the plate on the back of the engine, but I know from when I took it apart, it took a lot of wiggling and jiggling with two of us to get the thing apart, and I suspect it's going to be even worse on the way back in. So rather than me continue and struggle now for a considerable amount of time, I'm going to wait until Monday when I've got one of the lads in, hopefully, and I can get it all jiggled and put back together. before getting on with my real work. So so I'm going to leave it there for now, but I'm very, very pleased with how that all went together. I'm going to call that a great success. Well folks, a few days have passed and we have had some success with getting the engine and gearbox back together. It actually was very, very easy when you have a second pair of hands. And I also had a very good tip from my friend Dan, who is a Volvo tech, and he suggested putting a ratchet strap around the keel and around the leg, and then you can adjust quite easily with the ratchet strap the angle of the gearbox mounting flange to the engine, get that exactly right. And then with my friend Sean, we just wiggled the gearbox back in, and then literally it took seconds just to go back together, put the bolts in, torque them up to 40 Newton meters, and it is all essentially back together. There are a few little jobs left to do just to completely finish this off, so I need to reconnect everything, which I'm not going to show you because it's the reverse of what I did before. I need to put this rubbery gaiter on the outside. Now, I did consider putting some high density foam in the hole and then putting a little skim of filler over it just to make it super smooth, but in the interest of time and wanting to get this boat on the water and play with it, I've got a brand new one of these which came with the kit, so that will just get glued on the outside. In fact, they say to use contact adhesive and I don't have any to hand, so I'm probably going to use some adhesive sealant just around the edges of this. I'll stick it on the hull. I know quite a few people have done that, not had any issues, so we will do that shortly. I am thinking that I'll bring this video to a close here. There are some works that I am going to do to this, which is going to be the subject of a separate video, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to replace the exhaust hose because it looks pretty grot. It is original, and I know that exhaust hoses have a finite life. When they go in the most inconvenient time, so I'm going to run a new exhaust hose all the way through the boat and out. The old stuff's really kind of hard, and I can see the metal spiral in it is rusting out, so it is really well past its best, although it wasn't actually leaking. There's some servicing and some bits and pieces I'm going to do on this, and there's also going to be a nice upgrade to the engine control lever, which is outside. So that brings us to a close. Thank you very, very much for watching. Do remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so. They both make a big difference to the growth of my channel, and if you want to be absolutely super awesome, you can be one of those fantastic people that I'd like to thank for supporting the show financially using the PayPal link that is down in the description below, and I'll also pop it on the screen. Thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time for some more SJ fun getting this on the water. We are really, really close. See you soon. Bye for now.